Welcome back to SGTV. So today we're going to be talking about electrical compliance, and we have Ryan Dempsey from E5 and TCW joining us once again. It's good to have you back, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you for inviting me onto this again. Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm loving your background, by the way.
So my quotes, yeah, it gives have a coffee in the morning, read some quotes. It sets you up for the day. So
it's not a bookcase anyway, is it?
No.
Normally they've all been bookcases on these quarantine things, aren't they? To be fair, I was going to put one on, but
the political ones where they've got like all these cool books to try and make them look really smart and cultured. Yeah. And
no, just my quote wall in the kitchen, I'm afraid.
Don't work for some of them, does it? Well, it does for Ryan, obviously. But
yeah, and I should mention we've also got Anthony Smith, a compliance consultant, joining us. It's the first time for Anthony joining us on SGTV, so it's a pleasure to have you joining us, mate.
No, but thank you very much for inviting me. Look forward to it.
So compliance, quite a generic term, really, quite vague in its description. So I'm really going to be in your hands for this. So I mean, when I talk to people about compliance, it's quite new to contractors at ground level, not necessarily new when you're working in things like council and that kind of thing. So let's start with you, Ryan. So why is that? And I know when you're talking about compliance, it can mean anything from the design of your system all the way through to commissioning. So let's go from there.
Okay, so what's really important to kind of fully understand from the word compliance is there is not one shoe fits all, and compliance isn't something that you achieve as a whole. Compliance is a series of ticks to achieve what would be known in kind of specifically in housing or in electrical contracting. If you have a full list of things that need to be followed, so my view would be compliance is achieving a positive result to a specific instruction or a guidance, and that could be across the whole realms of, like you said, design, specification, achieving a specific result. Ultimately, compliance around electrical compliance is trying to achieve assurance. It's the key ingredients across a multiple level to get into that assurance tag. So yeah, my view on compliance, you could ask 10 people in a room and they'll tell you compliance means it's installed to BS 7671, which is right in a sense, but it's not completely right. So yeah, it's an interesting subject that we'll probably find ourselves walking all around the houses as we discuss it. So there's never just one shoe fits all.
How about you, Anthony? What's your take on the generic term of compliance?
Very much similar to Ryan's, but I look at compliance is like a fictional concept that doesn't exist and can never be achieved. Listen, you've got 4 types of people that I've met on, my journeys through doing all of this, and Ryan's heard me talk about this before. You've got the absolute blissfully unaware. You've got the receptionist, male or female, doesn't really matter nowadays, who thinks compliance is nothing more than a humble pat test. And I hate saying the word pat test because it's a portable appliance test or an in-service inspection of electrical equipment. And that's it for them. You have no idea about anything else. And in fact, many of them believe, because there is a line in a book that says that you don't technically need to do fixed wire testing, rightly or wrongly, they will look as pat testing being the absolute god of compliance. And as long as you've got a sticker on the computer, then they're abiding by the law. You've got the other ones that don't really care, the farmers that believe they've never had an issue for 15 years, so why should they bother? You've got those that do the bare minimum, the 10% brigade. And then you've got those like me and Ryan and the rest of the educated or the Bain-initiated legion of shadow legion of whatever you want to call them, that know all about electrical compliance, like the contractors. And they're easy to talk to. But the hardest thing is not preaching to the converted. It's about trying to get the education out there to the uninitiated. Those that have no idea at all about what it's all about. Ryan's right, you'll get 10 of us in a room and we'll all have our own version of compliance, largely based around our own commercial objectives, I would say. But when you're talking to the end user, they haven't got a bloody clue. And compliance can mean anything to them. It can mean, well, it is what Ryan just said. It's not one size fits all. It's a work in progress. It never ends. You'll never achieve it. But you'll tick certain boxes in order to be able to fit into certain categories to satisfy certain either regulatory authorities or insurance individuals or whatever the commercial objectives are or your managers in your departments are requiring. So there's a whole range of different things, to be honest. Doesn't it? But you'll never reach it. You'll never reach it because it's ever changing.
How are you getting that message across? How are you trying to educate people in the simplest form? Because, like you say, it's not an easy thing. Look, you're going to get different answers on what compliance is. So, how do you teach that?
Well, I think sometimes you've got to sort of, from my perspective, me and Ryan were doing seminars up and down the country. Ryan would do a lot of seminars with, housing association individuals who know quite a lot about the compliance side of things. And he'd also join me on the other side of it, which was trying to educate those that when you're in a room of 100 people, maybe 20 of them are electrically biased and the rest of them worked in HR and have been given a job now looking after the 1,000 property portfolio in a social housing organisation and having to deal with that. So it's about not dumbing it down, but you've got to try and make it as palatable and as understandable as possible to be able to give them that first step, that sort of electrical awareness step into a much brighter and bigger world.
I think what's really important as well to kind of add on to that is when you consider trying to educate people who may not kind of fully understand or comprehend the term compliance or the actions that need to be followed to achieve a specific level of compliance, you always have to strip it right back to its core purpose, and that is people and property safety. What am I trying to achieve ultimately? I'm trying to achieve safety is first and foremost priority. There are a set list of things that I need to do to ensure, one, that house doesn't set on fire, or two, that tenant or that child who lives in that property or that manager who works in that factory isn't going to brush past a metal enclosure that's live. And you're trying to achieve some safety initially. You're then trying to protect property secondary, and then you build on that. So you're either perfect in that respect, and that's where and when Anthony says we talk to people across the country, our whole purpose for talking to these people is to educate them on those two core things. We're not here to somebody's house they're not happy with the particular windows that are in their kitchen. They want massive French doors or a sliding glass doors because they think they'd like to look at that. Do I want to spend money to give them the facility to see all of their garden where I've got a series of houses that don't have any RCD protection, and that money can be spent there to make me compliant to somebody's safety rather than giving somebody the ability to sunbathe in the kitchen? It's a really difficult balance to capture. But if you strip it right back to its core values, then it's easier. It's not easy.
Yeah, you're basically talking about integrity and safety more than anything else, and it properly annoys. It annoys some in the social housing sector, I would say, because you'll come across people that will that will turn around and say, right, I've got an XYZ budget and I want to rewire all these houses, and we can't physically justify that because they don't require rewiring. But they'll say, no, but it's really old and I believe. And I said, well, I'm really glad you believe in that, but prove to me why. But you were always sort of like bouncing off commercial pressures. Like I said, you've got those different groups of individuals. So the electrically biased individuals are probably easier to speak to, but sometimes can be harder to speak to because they'll have their own preconceived ideas as to what they believe is right and wrong. And they won't necessarily take your particular direction because it doesn't meet their final aims. But then it's those that literally have no idea. And they'll be told by many people that you've got to have this done, you've got to have that done, everything else has got to be done because of a commercial objective. And it's about making them understand that in the basics, it's about integrity and safety. So it would be lovely to rewire all these old houses, but unless they are unsafe, unless they pose a danger to life or property, what's the point of spending the money? We haven't, especially coming out of COVID as well. Last time we used to say, we've just come out of a big recession. We haven't got bottomless pits of cash. We've now just come out of one of the period where we've been experiencing the most highly infectious disease known to man, and we haven't got bottomless pits of cash. So I think the education on electrical compliance or compliance as a whole across properties, be it from the social housing market to the commercial industrial, is even more important than it ever has been, because you've not got a lot of money, so you need to know how to be able to spend that better. And a wish list is wonderful, but the protection of life and property is much more important. But you can do that without spending any more than you have to.
Do you find there's a difference in communicating between council and private housing on, you know, how you can be compliant in terms of funding and safety? Is there a bit of a difference there?
You
All
have
yours,
to,
Ryan.
yeah. One of the things that's really important, and just to echo what Anthony just said there, because it's a really valid point from a commercial perspective, is at the moment the industry is really trying its hardest to condense social housing with rented housing. It's trying to put those two together, and there's a clear difference. There's a clear difference in terms of social housing being. You'll have an executive team, you'll have a board of directors, you'll have a senior management team, you'll then have an engineering team, you'll then have an engineering department, a principal contractor. You will be managed across NEC contracts or JCT contracts, which will specify the need to manage life cycle, asset, performance, technology. You will have in social housing a full realm of competent and qualified people managing safety there's a problem with my fridge. You'll have a qualified engineer there within an hour to fix it. In private renting, you don't have that. You have a private rented property where you will have a tenant will have a faulty socket. They'll call the landlord and say, I've got a faulty socket. And that landlord, sometimes, not all of them, will say, fix it then. It's up to you to fix it. You live there. And the problem we've got now from that, it doesn't apply across the whole rounds of both those sectors. But what it does apply to is the way that the industry is trying to push housing at the moment is quite unfortunate that they're putting everybody in the same bucket, when in actual fact, all they're doing is strengthening or annoying the people who are already doing it well. And they're not really addressing those who aren't doing it. So it's it's an interesting subject, that one.
Would it not be better, though, to stick all the private rental sector to the same standards and have them form, making your landlords much more accountable for electrical safety? I mean, the thing is that from my perspective on social housing, you can't, the two are completely different. You've got your social housing, the tenants in social housing have a range of diverse and complex needs. And as a result of that, the potential or the risk to the property or the installation is far greater than what you would traditionally find in a private rented house, because unless that private rented house comes under the remit of some sort of overseer, if you will, because there's no social housing stock left, and therefore they're putting these complex and diverse people with their own unique problems and sort of like their own problems into these properties. You don't really have that level of risk. You don't really have that level of risk. So I think that, and I've always been, and as Ryan knows, I'm always in favour of a proper bona fide, individual license to practice where there's accountability for the electricians. But I think there should be equally a level of accountability for private rented landlords, because you do have the few which the few tow rags that run the properties which give private rental a bad name, but then you've got a considerable amount of people who provide you with properties which make private renting an attractive proposition. I've been renting all my life, and I'm only just now, purchasing properties because of the position that I'm in now. But I've always liked it because I had the freedom to move wherever I wanted. And if anything went wrong, I'd ring the landlord and he'd take care of it. They look after all the maintenance of it. But that's not everybody. But I think that they should all be sort of like shoved into a very similar sort of bracket and be treated on the worst case and be given some sort of legislation.
I guess if you and we're digressing, we're talking quite a lot about housing, but if you consider that comment and you say there needs to be more legislation around the landlord, there's the Housing Health and Rating System, there's the Landlord and Tenants Act, there's the Housing Act, there's defective premises, there's Consumer Protection, there's Health and Safety at Work Act. There is a series of legislation that's already in the marketplace. The problem is it's the education and, more importantly, the enforcement of that. There isn't anyone to enforce it. There's legislation there, but no one to enforce it.
No, because I think all of them fall. Do they fall into? Do they fall? I mean, you've got the Landlords and Tenancy Act, which I appreciate, but do they fall into? Because we've had the comments about the social housing sector is, are they are domestic properties, or are they not domestic properties? Are they commercial properties? Do they fall inside this particular legislation or that particular legislation? Because they're a very grey area, with social housing being a grey area, which shouldn't technically be so. Those in the private rental don't even get to class themselves as being grey.
They're
Do you know
domestic,
what I mean?
they're domestic properties.
They've literally had their citizenship stripped from them and shoved in a different country, and be told to live the rest of their life not knowing whether they're here or there.
Social housing is 100% domestic properties, and you have to remember that the people living in them, that's their castle, and the things that you do, the decisions you make, you impact that person's. Just because it's owned by somebody else doesn't take away the fact that it is somebody's castle. That is where somebody lives, and that's somebody's home. And from a legislation perspective, from the housing regulator, the housing regulator would not even entertain a conversation that it's a commercial property. They would only ever entertain that it is. You can't dehumanize the value of somebody's property as a domestic property where they live and sleep to say that that's a commercial property. It's never ever going to happen.
No, I get that. I completely get that. But I also look at the entities or the people that look after these properties are commercial enterprises.
Oh, absolutely.
And commercial enterprises, then properties. It's a bit like when you look at your big sort of like your Bruntvoods or your big commercial landlords. I mean, they're commercial landlords looking after commercial properties, but effectively it's an electrical installation. It's like saying about the which has always like got me about the parts and the regs that talk about temporary installations. For me, an installation is an installation. You're living it up, and regardless whether it's there for a week or if it's there for 100 years, it's still a dangerous piece of kit. So it's like if you've got a massive properties which are generating profit for an organisation, then yes, they are still a domestic home for somebody to live in, but they are a commercial asset, and therefore, you know, there is the argument, and I agree that would never entertain it. There is the argument that they should be considered as a commercial property.
Good luck with that one, Anthony.
Oh, I'm never going to take it on, mate. I'm going to go cooking food and making pictures. You know what I mean? The industry has been amazing to me, and I've loved it. I mean, I've never been necessarily one of those. I believe we've got things that could be done better, but I've never been one of those that believes that the industry has been broken. But it's just everybody's to their own opinion. But there are always these questions that you can ask. But I don't have an opinion as to say, listen, they're all wrong because they should be commercial. But it's always been a grey area now, because that's a grey area. Your private rental landlords don't even get to consider themselves as being a grey area, so fall even further outside of that scope when it comes to being able to govern electrical safety inside their properties, which is hard work. Because it's like you could have a license to practice for electricians in commercial properties, because you cover by the electricity work act and I've even forgotten most of my bloody terminations, the electricity at work regulations, and your health and safety at work act, but more the electricity at work regulations that cover commercial properties, but they don't cover domestic properties because they're not at work. And that was one of the issues that we had with the case with the young girl that died quite a few years ago, 6 months after she moved into a property, and they had to revisit that case twice, and they loosely were able to clock the QS on a technicality. But at first point, it was a place of work while the property was being done, but 6 months after the handover, it was no longer covered by the particular piece of legislation. Therefore, they struggled to be able to prosecute the person responsible for that defective installation, which was hard work, really. So you could potentially create a situation where you individually license all the electricians and strike them off for defective, dangerous, or negligent work. But that wouldn't stop them from being able to go out and to exercise their human rights to be able to make money, because they could go and work in the domestic market, because the domestic market is not covered by the same laws. And that's the point of where I try to get to with that. The private rental are not subject to the same, even the grey interpretation of what you would subject or what people like social housing are subjected to.
Ben, we can definitely move on to the next question.
Yeah,
I'm going to agree to disagree with Anthony on that.
I was going to ask next. Again, it's quite a broad question because I imagine there's a lot to it. But let's talk about some of the rules and regulations of compliance itself, some of the fundamental aspects of it.
In terms of the rules and regulations around compliance, that you have to. It's very important for an electrician working in a specific territory or a specific sector to fully understand I'd like to say the nuance of that sector to be able to then apply that legislation. Because try and think of an example, a perfect example. I don't mean to refer it back to housing, but that is my background. So let's just say, for instance, you are working in housing and you are installing a consumer unit. And when you walk into that property, there's some children there. You know that the people who are going to live in that property, it's a 3-bedroom house. It's a family constructed house. So you know there's always going to be a family in there. So for me, for the BS 7671, and I'm reading through the 18th edition of the wine regulations, I know that I need to put things in place in accordance with the fundamental principles, which is chapter 13. And that's placing things out of reach and putting barriers between potentially touching an electrical installation. So when I fit that consumer unit, I'm going to fit that consumer unit at a high level. And I'm going to stick it at high level because I know as an electrician that there's a chance that if I put it at mid-level, where the building regulations tell me, building regulations part M in accessibility, that's going to tell me that I'm going to have to install that consumer unit at a level so that it accounts for the Disability Discrimination Act, so that somebody can operate that device in a wheelchair or so on, or and that. But me as an electrician, I'm going to look at that and say, well, BS 7671 says that I need to put things that have potential issues out of reach. Now, there's an argument to say consumer unit's just a switch. It's like a light switch. It's IP rated. You should be able to install it so its integrity is fully intact. However, some people may want to make that decision. So understanding the nuance of the sector you work in and then being confident to challenge when something may not sit within what your realms of what you need to do, that's really important to understand rules and regulations in a specific sector. So that's my example of it, but there's hundreds of different things. There's a combined spider web of trying to link the building regulations, the consumer protection regulations, plugs and sockets, the 18th edition, the guidance notes through to 128, the on-site guide.
Yeah.
Hopefully they would all see the same thing, but
history
they don't, do they?
They don't. No, history tells us they don't.
You know, you can read comments in relation to coding, definitions of codings in the guidance notes, and they'll differ to what BS 7671 will say. We have examples of representing contractors in the UK who have had monies withdrawn from them because the guidance notes will say one thing, but the BS 7671 and their associated documentation provided by scheme providers say a different thing. So therefore, legals get involved in it. You know, are you providing me with the right things? And it can be a spider web. And you would think that all these particular different individuals would get together and talk, but they don't. And they never have done. And this is what I mean about the whole, the complexity. I mean, I think that, you know, if when we talk about on the previous one where we agree to disagree on certain things, it's not that we agree to disagree on many things with myself and Ryan, but that's an inherent thing inside our industry. Is that just because I'll say something doesn't make it wrong, or what Ryan says is right, but it's that whole sort of understanding, interpretation, and no uniformity in coming together in a single voice to be able to put a single opinion across. Even the geezer, they'll sit down and they'll talk about they'll talk about different changes that they're going to be putting into the likes of the wine regulations. Ryan's reading them. Obviously, you know, I've been looking at them as well through what we've been doing previously. But the gentlemen that are involved in writing this and the collaboration they have in the formulation of things like your guidance notes, your on-site guides, and then all the other little supplementary books. Somebody even questioned me and said, well, listen, I've got a little £5 union book that I got when I was at college. And I just thought, what? Throw that away. And there's all this different literature, and none of it is consistent. It's consistent in its approach to being able to deal with integrity and safety, but the outline, the fundamentals or the nitty-gritties of it all is very conflicting and very confusing. And then don't get started on the technical manuals that you get from all the different scheme providers, because again, that throws another spanner in the works. They all go to do the right thing, but they've all got their own commercial models and their own commercial, and everything boils down to money, memberships, and commercial models.
Okay, so let's take any electrician, for example, whether it's a young apprentice or someone who wants to brush up on their compliance knowledge. And like you say, there's so many different ways of interpreting things, so many different avenues to get that information from. From both of your perspectives, now this might give two different answers, but how would you best say for someone to find clear instructions on compliance that you're not going to get too many different ways of interpreting that? Or do you think that doesn't exist and something else needs to be done about that?
I don't think something. Go on, sorry, Ryan.
One of the greatest things of this century, or where we live today, is the internet. And the internet provides a massive opinions. And a good example is I went to my wife's Christmas party before lockdown. And my wife works in heart surgery. And when I was speaking to one of the surgeons, he mentioned an operation called a cabbage. And I didn't want to ask him. I didn't want to seem stupid. So as I walked away from that, I put in heart surgery cabbage into an internet webpage because I wanted to know what he was talking about. And then I learned that it was about coronary artery bypass grafting. And I would never have been able to find that before the internet. I would have had to ask my wife or this surgeon and look stupid. For people in the electrical industry now, you have a wealth of information and opinions on in podcasts. There's loads of people doing podcasts, this one included. There's enough material. The regulations that really matter to the sector are the ones you can download for free. They're the ones that really hurt when you're dragged into court. You've also got the likes of really innovative and entrepreneurial people who are sticking their head above the parapet to say, look, guys, if you want information and you want my opinion, you might not agree with it. Here's my telephone number. Here's my email address. Here's my web address. There's a lot of material out there. And the key is to inspire the generations coming into the electrical industry to understand that to better themselves in terms of their understanding, inspire those individuals to really grab hold of what's out there and learn, because the more you learn, the more you earn. And it's a very valid statement, that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of material out there for people to kind of really better themselves, and just stick it into Google what you want to know, and it'll be there.
I think that's right. I don't think anything needs to change. I don't think anything needs to come to replace. I think there are pros and cons to the wealth of information that's out there. But I think that even looking at it from a scheme provider's perspective, and when you look towards trying to organise any of the meetings that we used to organise, used to be part of the ECA for many years, is that you can't really get people coming down to branch meetings anymore, because what's the point? We don't want to sit there and listen to, and I know when we've got Scolmore here, but we don't want to sit there and listen to a provider or a manufacturer talk to us about something in a way that then leads to a sale, because we can go online and we can get all the information online easily, quickly, and sometimes in a much more engaging manner. Because one of the overriding issues that we have with regards to seminars, presentations, is the presenters. And most presenters are generally thrown in there because nobody else will do it. They turn up with a PowerPoint, they'll read from the PowerPoint. It is all right. It's really dull and boring. And it's hard to be able to try and find people that are genuinely skilled at being able to do presentations that can inspire people. You go in listening to an electrical conference, and you come out punching the air, thinking you're about to hit Clubber Lang in Rocky 3, and you're jogging down the road and making a fool of yourself. But them sort of people are very difficult to get hold of, and it's them sort of people that will lead the way forward. The internet has a wealth of information. It's given a voice to people that wouldn't traditionally have it. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody believes that they are best. And to be honest, and I'm not even going to say it because he's sat here, but in all the years that I've worked in the electrical industry, and I've met some online protagonists, haven't I, mate? But the only online protagonist that has ever listen, I went to Dubai to a conference, an FM conference, to see if I would do some work over there in a geezer from a national main scheme provider, sat down and said to me, "Have you heard of a bloke called Ryan Dempsey?" I was like, hell, I'm off. For Christ, I'm in Dubai. But to be honest, listen, from a marketing perspective, you go around and you build up your fan base, or you gain notoriety, and that's how you're able to get across. And Ryan's been very good at being able to do that in the early years, and has got a great reputation inside the social housing sector. But he's brought the only thing that I've seen, and I've spent money on it and used it, to the market that actually provides any benefit. and that was the TCW software. And this is the one thing that, when you're looking at it from a local contractor's perspective to a large contractor that we believe that, that I was involved with previously, is the fact we'd spend tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds every year on innovation to be able to get things done more efficiently and look at the ways that technology can actually change the face of our industry, which then unfortunately means that smaller contractors will always struggle to be able to compete because they haven't got that resource to be able to move it. And that creates, a little bit of disparity and sometimes some negative comments in the industry. The industry has a lot of voices, and there is a whole range of topics and information that you can get to be able to help you inform your mind as well as you can. A lot of great personalities out there, but it is what it is. It doesn't need anything to replace it. We don't need something new. It doesn't need breaking. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody has an opinion because of an agenda that they hold. But it's down to you as an individual growing up or in this industry to be able to take all this information and to be able to form an opinion that best suits you and your environment, how it helps your business, and how it also inevitably helps your end user.
Yeah, and I could be wrong in saying this, but I imagine most people out there, especially putting their neck on the line, are doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it because they want to share good information and clear information that's going to help people and make the industry a better place at the end of the day.
And that's a really key point. I think it's a really key statement. You find people's objectives and intent is different, whether it's to make money or whether it's to inspire or educate the sector. Their intent is honest, and that's it. It's for them. And in the process of doing what they're doing in the sector, ultimately they lead to really improving people's understanding. So yeah, it's a really good comment that you just made there.
Yeah,
but I'm not too sure. And that's not disagreeing with Ryan. I'm not too sure in as much as unless you've got something to risk or something to lose, you're not sticking your neck on the line. Ryan had a lot to lose because he had a business together. A lot of the people that go out there and put their opinions online don't necessarily have, and I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying, some of them don't have things to lose. I mean, apart from, the space on the social channels that they operate. So it's down to those that have stuff to lose. It's very risky, and I've always been a little bit averse to it, myself personally, because I understand that there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there where the caps locks is on permanently, and they can be very, very vicious. I mean, this industry is not for the faint-hearted, and you've got to be thick-skinned. But not everybody that's out there that's doing it is doing it and putting their head above the parapet, for honourable and right reasons. Everybody has their own agenda. There's no such thing as a selfless act. Not even the Queen, God bless her, and God bless her and Philip, does anything for. It's not even they do it for self. It's not a selfless act. There's no such thing as a selfless act. So we've just got to be mindful and make our own opinions, and we formulate our opinions and we gravitate to those that resonate with our, personalities, cultures, and ethics. And that was one of the principles, where they originally set up the E5, which was all about ethics in the industry, and it was an honourable thing. And I think it's done a good job. I think it speaks to a lot of people that wouldn't traditionally have a voice or even have the courage to speak. But that's just my opinion.
Let's go on to competent person schemes. I remember speaking to you before, Ryan. You're not part of a competent person scheme, are you? So what's your view on how compliance and competent person schemes, how do they work together?
So it's really the competent person schemes get a lot of flack. They do get a lot of stick in the electrical industry, and I think it's exactly what we've just said there. From putting your head above the parapet, these schemes have done that, so they have to take the rough with the smooth. And in terms of achieving electrical compliance or achieving compliance to these competent person schemes, you have the specification. Don't know if you've heard of it. It's the EAS specification, the electrotechnical assessment specification, scheme specification. And what that is it defines a set criteria that you have to meet to be a member of these schemes. So in terms of monitoring and maintaining a register or a scheme, to be on that scheme, you have to hit certain criteria in terms of your competency and qualification, in terms of your liability, in terms of how you structure your business, how you maintain the regulations and the standards. You have a copy of them that you can educate them. So the competent person schemes get a lot of flack. If they weren't there, I think we'd be in a much worse position as an industry.
Agreed.
I think they could do more to enforce electrical compliance or electrical competence. But yeah, to meet compliance as we're talking about here, I think there is a set. We said it right at the beginning in terms of that tick sheet for meeting compliance, and the EAS specification has a number of ticks that need to be achieved. So
one thing I hear often, and I don't know if it's necessarily true, but it's definitely an opinion I'm hearing, is that things aren't often brought into regs or into compliance, as we were talking about, until something bad happens. Which, like I say, it might not necessarily be true, because there are organisations who
absolutely it's true.
who are actively looking at improving standards, but at the same time, if something bad happens, that's probably going to accelerate how that gets integrated into regs and compliance. So what's your thoughts on, let's start with you, Anthony, what's your sort of thoughts on that?
It's absolutely true. Otherwise, why would you do it? You've got technologies that have dangers, and them dangers result in injury or fabric of buildings being damaged or destroyed. I mean, who in the right minds would go out? I mean, if you go back to the original documents back in 1882, who in the right mind would go and give us 18 editions with God knows how many pages and thousands of regs if issues hadn't have occurred and problems didn't arise from the ever-changing evolution of electricity and what we install in our installations? You just wouldn't do it. I mean, it's different. It's like if you got a car and you want to make changes to a car because you want it to go further, then that's one thing, because there is a benefit to it. But I mean, ultimately, a lot of the changes, not all the changes, I think Ryan and I can be, somewhat aligned in understanding that, there isn't a great deal of client-facing representation on JPAL 64, and a lot of the changes could be necessarily attributed to commercial models, back down to that whole, white elephant in the room, the commercial model of introducing RCDs and AFDs and all the rest of it, but not naturally. Why would you change anything unless there's been a problem? And we do that in this country. We wait till there's a problem, and then we get a little white room together, we get our papers, we do our little committees, and then we think about how to put things in place to prevent it from happening again. Rather than looking at things that can proactively prevent things from happening, we tend to not bother, because, again, it's that whole electricity at work regulations, that whole accountability of, what risk versus cost, why we don't, retrofit RCDs in every social housing property, because, as we've heard previously before, you look at how many incidents occur in the entire stock and how much it would cost to completely deal with the entire stock. The actual cost of it compared to the incidents aren't really justifiable. So until something generally happens, we don't tend to operate like that in this country. It's not the way we go about it. We don't do it just for do its sake, unless somebody's been hurt or unless somebody's going to profit from it.
What's your thoughts on that, Ryan?
It is very similar, and it's interesting when you do consider the commercial kind of opportunities of the electrical industry, because the commercial opportunities within the electrical industry, as somebody who used to work for a local authority and not have that kind of business acumen, my naivety at the time would be, why are people making these decisions? As I move across into now as the kind of the chief exec of a technology company that I founded and that I'm leading, and that business acumen, still learning, I'm still kind of grabbing as much information as I can gradually start to make more assessments on how the electrical industry as a whole is moving forward from a commercial perspective. A good example, I always like to kind of move examples, is the introduction, like Anthony said, of RCD protection. I think they were first kind of presented in the 15th edition for equipment that was powered for outside. And I think at the time they were BS 4293 rather than the 61008s that we get now. And those RCDs were kind of slotted into the wiring regulations for a good purpose, because RCD protection has I read a 50-page document once, an assessment from BEMA, who referred to RCD protections that if they're installed correctly and they're maintained correctly, there's a 99% chance of somebody surviving if they come into contact with electricity. Now, whether you like that or not from a commercial perspective, those odds are what I would bet on every single day of the week. I would support that 100%. Yeah. But since the 15th edition, and since we moved into the 16th edition, which I think was 1993, as we've moved into the 16th edition, we've started to see things more from a commercial perspective start to come in and almost be thrown in and just expect the industry to start buying them. Good example is arc fault detection. Fantastic. We can make a lot of money, but they were pushed into the sector when in actual fact, they weren't fully tested. They weren't fully confirmed. You looked around the world and people were seeing they didn't work. And when you talk about inspiring a sector or inspiring a trade to kind of really adopt what those people who are sat right at the top are saying, you have to first and foremost instill confidence in the decisions you're making. And if you go onto the internet and you find that arc fault detection in America was being outlawed and you can't use them, and whether that was true or not, that information was available for people to look. There's then questions coming back into the sector of, do we actually need these? Do they actually work? Now, fundamentally, going back to my point about RCD protection, arc fault detection does work. They're a fantastic piece of kit. If you install them correctly, if you utilize the correct kind of design criteria to select and install them, and surge protection and all these other things that are coming into kind of fruition now with technology, they make a difference, because one day they will save one person's life. And if that's the case, they were all worth it. But in terms of the industry as we see it now, before 1990, I would go out and see that we were a very proactive engineering sector. We were very kind of proactive to having clever, competent and qualified people who understood that we could play with sine waves, we can understand sine waves, we can start predicting and using technology to predict certain things. As we've come from 1990 to today, we're a very reactive sector to risk. Grenfell's a perfect example. Grenfell, we had a catastrophe with 87 or 97 people were killed in Grenfell. And that was due to a series of kind of bad decisions, or a series of bad materials, or a series of bad management. No one fully understands. But now we're reacting, creating a new safety bill. We're creating a new British standard about digitalization. So yeah, pre-1990, fantastic proactive engineering sector. After 1990, we react to things when somebody dies.
So how would someone in the industry who, let's say, for example, someone working on social housing, that they might be spotting something that's not quite up to standard and they're seeing it very often, that could lead to an incident. So how would that person then decide, right, I think more should be done about that, rather than just, venting on the internet, which is just it's not gonna really go anywhere? What's your direct route?
I've got a perfect example of what someone like that could do.
Okay.
In 2013, when I was head of electrical compliance for Leeds City Council, I managed 57,000 properties. I had 14 contractors, and I was receiving thousands of electrical documents, and I was physically seeing the competence and quality of people installing work there. I got to a point where I was that frustrated that people didn't understand what they were looking at from an electrical perspective. Asking people, what does VIR mean? And being told that it's Ohm's law, and then me pointing at a piece of cable, saying, what's that? And them saying, I don't know, it's rubber cable. Do you not know that that's VIR? And having these conversations with qualified electricians in 2013 resulted in me sending a begging letter to the IET asking for help on the competence and quality of people. Since 2013 to today's date, the electrical industry and the IET have created Eng Tech Elect as a standard off the back of my recommendations in 2013. That's been grown to a point where in 2017, I was kind of rewarded and given a fellowship to the IET for a number of things where I saw a problem and I wanted a solution, but I had to beg for somebody to listen. It was hard. And I mean beg for a solution. So it's not easy. It isn't easy to get something, but if anybody's in the industry who sees something and they want change, stand up on the tallest building and shout as loud as you can at as many people as you can, but it's not guaranteed that someone will listen, unfortunately.
No, not at all. Yeah, they won't listen. In most cases, they won't listen because they have memberships. Memberships put a lot of money into their commercial ventures, and I'm not even saying that it's wrong, because I think everybody gets out of bed to do the right thing. I don't think anybody gets out of bed to do the wrong thing. Things will. I think I see the industry changing even further to probably the disgust of some of your online individuals that that are trying to bring knowledge and education to the industry, because we are moving even more down a digitized route. We're looking at, I'm very excited about seeing the whole development of digital MCBs and how they can work. Can we connect them through the Internet of Things or through blockchain technology to BMS panels? How does that work from a domestic level? When we've got smart meters that can relay across real-time information to be able to let supply authorities understand your usage and your behaviours inside your properties. So therefore, it removes. There is always that. I'd love to be able to create a panel that can self-test. It wipe out the industry that has done me so well. But it doesn't really matter about that, because it's technology evolves, and I think that as technology evolves, the need for the traditional spark that we used to have, that would. You'll still need them in I would say probably in your commercial and your industrial, but the need for dealing with things like MI cables or threading conduits or all of that sort of stuff will be more of a specialist service being dealt with by specialist individuals. And I think as time changes and as technology evolves, we will no longer be reliant on the traditional wires in the walls and the distribution of AC electricity in the way that we have been doing, and it will come onto a more plug and play European sort of model where things will be more modular, controlled by digital devices, which will, bloody hell, if you think Part P and domestic installers rile Sparkies enough as it is, Christ almighty, even the Part P domestic installers will be riled that they'll never be able to compete against it, because that's the way that the industry is going. That's the way that the industry will end up being. And it's a sad thing, but the electrician will become a specialist niche product. It will be more down to all sorts of different multi-service engineers. And even from a social housing perspective, if you take like 20 years down the line, who knows what will happen? And you're dealing with a lot of modular buildings with digital MCBs, all connected via the internet or through blockchain technology to a central hub in an office. A 20-year-old version of Ryan will be sat there looking after 30,000 properties with everything at his fingertips, and not a single person will need to go out. Because don't forget that when you look at your guidance notes and it talks about your changes on your properties every 5 to 10 years or a change of occupancy, your change of occupancy doesn't need to be done by a Sparky, because you're not going to go in every time you change a property every 6 months and do an installation resistance test. So a simple test by a qualified or an electrically aware individual with inside your maintenance team to replace sockets and switches, lamp holders, and to be able to do a couple of RCD tests and fill in a PDA will be sufficient to be able to get the information needed to be able to manage that magnitude of risk across that whole portfolio. And again, reduces that level of that level of spend in order for them to be able to redistribute that to areas of much more concern. So that's the future of it. And again, everything is down to, most of the objections that I see and always have seen have been down to commercial basis. I've been down to commercial objections, because it's down to, these people shouldn't trade in our industry, because you can't compete with a geezer that's done like 4 or 5 years of training, done an apprenticeship, he's got a technician graded Sparky card, and you've got somebody that's done short courses and retrained and gone doing some house bashing. So they'll never be able to commercially compete against it, but it's moving to a level where your technician graded Sparkies will going to be far too qualified to operate in the domestic market. And probably even the Part P geezers will be far too qualified to operate in the domestic market, because it'll be digitized and controlled, which will be the better way forward of being able to manage, I think, electrical risk, if you can take the human elements out of it, and it can all be dealt with algorithms, programs, with a smaller team of highly trained individuals to be able to look at being able to maintain it. My opinion.
No, it's a valid opinion. Everyone has their own opinions. Everyone has their own views on how.
Skynet will become sentient eventually. I tell you, Skynet will become sentient. She may class herself as Genesis or whatever she chooses, but I tell you, Arnie will be walking our streets before we know it.
Growing up watching Terminator 1 and 2, which were the only good ones in my opinion, that has generally put a massive fear into me that at some stage in life that's going to happen,
It happens already. I mean, I went to watch Terminator Genesis in London quite a few years ago. My missus loves Arnie. She thinks he's amazing, especially as Terminator. And we came out, we went to an ECA conference, and they were talking about should the industry speak to Google. But at that time, Google had just bought an algorithm from two sweatbags playing Call of Duty till 3 o'clock in the morning for £1.3 billion, was installing it across Europe's most ambitious rollout of smart meters. In English homes, 25 million of these smart meters have that algorithm in, which allows supply authorities to know in real time what your energy usage is. So when me, you and Ryan go and get our GHDs to straighten our hair, they know everything about it. And they charge you more efficiently as a result of being able to have that trim, smooth, chiseled look.
Did you notice I'd straightened my hair this morning?
Oh, honestly, I can see that's why you didn't send me the link earlier, because you were out doing your hair.
So that concludes our episode on electrical compliance. I want to thank Ryan and Anthony for joining us today. It's been really good. It's been, I feel like I've learned something, and I hope people out there watching have learned something. And I just want to thank you for coming on. I hope you people out there have enjoyed this. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to see more videos from us here at SGTV. There's more videos with Ryan on there. Hopefully we'll get you back on, Anthony, if we haven't scared you off today.
No, nobody scares me off. You can't shut me up. So I know when to behave.
We may even do a video on our favourite hair products, so look out for that one.
Yes. War paint, get it on eBay. Brilliant.
All right then. Thank you, everyone. See you again next time.